All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Modern Horror, the genre and what scares us evolve. For the
hold back.
I'm glad to see there's a number of people here that have not gotten their fill of things that go bump in the night after Halloween and the Day of the Dead, so great to see everyone here. I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce our moderator, Patrick Ewald. He's an American financier and producer known for his work in the independent film and video game industries. He's the owner and CEO of Epic Pictures Group, a film and video game production and distribution company that focuses on genre films. His recent film credits include The Man Who Killed Hitler and Then Bigfoot, Satanic Hispanics, The Cellar, and The Lake. His recent video game credits include Amanda the Adventurer, The Mortuary Assistant, My Friendly Neighbor, and Creepshow, which is currently in development with AMC Networks' Shudder. Please welcome Patrick.
Thank you. Oh man, my phone's turning off. All right, thank you very much, everybody. And we're going to get into the panel in 1 second. I just wanted to say a few words. Welcome, everybody. I don't know who's here, but I'm assuming a lot of filmmakers, people who want to be in the horror space. So hopefully we can answer a lot of these questions. And I want to first start off by saying what we're about to discuss may discourage some people, and it may encourage some people, but the point of this panel is to hopefully not just take away some valuable information, but also to let you know that there is a path to success if you listen to these 4 people very carefully. And I also want to add that the answer will be revealed at some point during the conversation, so you need to pay very close attention to learn this incredible secret to success. No pressure. I also hope to have some time for questions at the end, so please start thinking about what you might want to ask. And one final note, we are not going to be discussing AI and the future domination of our robot overlords. So just keep that in mind for questions. But I will let the AI of ChatGPT provide us with its generative introduction to our panel. In the words of the great AI bot, welcome to a riveting discussion on modern horror cinema and its evolving landscape. Today we have the honor of hosting 4 distinguished horror experts, each with their unique insights to shed light on the thrilling evolution of horror films and their impact on a global audience. Together we'll unravel the ominous mysteries and thrilling prospects that lie ahead in the ever-evolving world of modern horror, promising to captivate and terrify audiences worldwide. What'd you guys think? That was pretty good, right? All right, so now let's have our 4 human panelists introduce themselves, and maybe if you could, you don't have to, but give maybe a small piece of information about yourself that's unique to you and who you are as a person.
I have to start that?
Well,
okay, yeah, I can start that. That's fine, sure. Hey, what's up, everybody? I'm Stephen C. Miller, director, directed quite a bit of horror films, action films, got to work with some really great people. Something that's unique to me is I guess, I sort of get labeled as the guy that can make things super kinetic. So even in horror space. So I think that's something that's pretty unique to me.
Yeah.
Okay. Hi, my name is Cecilia. I work for Raven Banner Entertainment. I am our sales manager, and I sell scary movies for Oak Living internationally. Yeah.
Hi, everyone. My name is Bishal Dutta. I'm the writer-director. My first movie, It Lives Inside, just came out last month. It was released by Neon.
Yeah, please clap.
Paul Neinstein, co-CEO of Project X Entertainment. We do a lot in the horror, but horror fun space, and I'm a deal junkie when it comes to horror. So that's sort of my thing.
Cool. Thank you, guys, and thank you for being here. So one thing I do want to say, just sort of off the cuff, before we get into this panel as well, is I do want to say that everybody here on this panel, from my perspective, some of them I just got to know, some of them I know a little bit better. Like Stephen, I consider him not just a colleague, but a friend. And I think the one takeaway I have with everybody on this panel is that they are doers, right? They're constantly in motion, constantly making content, constantly looking for ways to make content. They're not waiting for things to happen. So I really respect and admire each one of them, and it's an element to their personalities that I think is really, I think, what makes them successful. So, and I'm hopefully you'll pick that up from the panel. I also want to say Stephen's very modest, but he just directed a film called Year 2 with Frank Grillo, and he just dropped this trailer on me the other day, and he was like, "Hey, dude, hey, check out this trailer. Just like tell me what you think." And I like jaw agape. It is like a fucking crazy werewolf action film that's going to be released, and I don't know how much I can say, but it's going to be released wide theatrically through Universal. And yeah, so, you know, it's like, it still happens. It's, you know, it's, dreams can come true, and if you keep at it, you know, things happen. So starting off, I just want to start off briefly about the word horror. And before we get into the specifics of the world of horror, but according to Wikipedia, horror is a film genre that seeks to elicit fear or disgust in its audience for entertainment purposes. So just to the panel, just to have a general discussion about horror, do you think this is an accurate definition of horror? Or do you think that there's more to be said about the horror genre and what it can offer to an audience, and why do we love or hate horror films? And Paul, why don't we reverse it?
You know, it's interesting because the one thing I think about when I think about horror, which you may not normally think about, is it brings people together. And I always look at it from the audience standpoint, much less than from the content creator side. And for us, the big sell to horror is you're getting a bunch of people together in a dark room to really enjoy a good time. They want to be scared. They want to have something to talk about. And that's how we always look at horror, which is, this is really a genre that may not always be looked at this way, but we look at it as bringing a group of people together.
I'm fully with Paul on that. I think what draws me to it is very much the communal experience of it, the experiences I had growing up watching horror films. I think there's also something very cathartic about it. I think there's a social utility to horror in the sense that it allows us to sort of express these deep, horrific fears, but do so in a very safe way. And that sort of thing, I think it's important, and it's the evolution of sort of ghost stories around the campfires. And I think it's for now the ultimate sort of expression of what that tradition is like and how it's, you know, how we do it still to this day.
Yeah, and to piggyback off of them is that it's something that we can share internationally. It's not something that is just strictly connected to one culture or one territory. It's something that everyone around the world can relate to and come together. And so yes, you can come together as a community, and you can be from anywhere in the world and still have that experience and that you know, entertainment and joy of watching something. And also horror can leave something kind of like an underlying tone. There's always a message behind any movie that you're watching. And so I really love that you can share that without being so aggressive in your I guess, your motive behind the story, if that makes sense. It's, you know, again, it's kind of hidden in there, which I love.
Yeah, I think it's a super accurate. I mean, they're all exactly right. I mean, for me, horror is a wave of emotions. I love the fact that it can take you through all the different sorts of emotions when you're sitting there. I mean, sometimes you're screaming, sometimes you're laughing, sometimes you're pinching. It's just like there's all of these different things that horror does to you emotionally. I mean, I can remember watching my first horror film with my dad, which was The Exorcist, and like I think my dad I thought was always the toughest dude in the room, but watching him squirm during The Exorcist, I think immediately was sort of like where I was like, okay, I get it. And I think that's something that I gravitated to. But I feel like, yeah, horror for me is definitely emotional, and I think that's what I love about it.
And Cecilia, you touched a little bit about the global audience. So just, we're not going to get into it yet. It's down the road, but just think about that because it is a really interesting topic that I want to address. So now let's get into a little bit about U.S. box office and about what the most successful horror films of 23 have been so far. So I just want to run down a quick list of the top 10, which were Scream, which is Paul. Woohoo! So congratulations, you are number one.
People are slowly coming after us, though.
No. As of today, you are number one. Megan, Five Nights at Freddy's, The Nun 2, Insidious, The Red Door, Evil Dead Rise, The Exorcist Believer. Are you guys seeing a trend here in terms of titles? Saw X or Saw 10, Talk to Me, The Boogeyman. I also want to give shout out to Bishal, who has It Lives Inside, which was a top 20 movie, and I'm going to give credit also to Epic. We had Terrifier in the theaters, which I think was a top 30 movie, so we're really excited about that. So congrats to you. So does this mean that sequels and recognizable IP is what defines modern horror, at least in the theatrical space? And is there hope for the independent horror filmmaker? And then it'd be really helpful to talk about specific projects, experiences here, and how other types of stories can potentially get made, especially in the indie world. And Bishal, why don't you kick it off?
Well, I think there are certainly a lot of sequels, a lot of remakes in the IP world, but I think to speak to what you guys have done with Scream, I think there's also a possibility where if the audience is demanding IP, there's an opportunity to take that model and have interesting filmmakers do unique things with it, right? I think Evil Dead Rise I thought was really cool. A lot of these films, I thought Saw 10 was great. I really enjoyed that film. So my point is, I think very much so it is a major currency, but that doesn't mean that filmmakers can't do something unique and creative. And I also want to speak to the success of a film like Talk to Me, which I thought was just incredible, and a film that's going to connect to, I think the real challenge is getting young people into the theaters to come see the movies. And a film like Talk to Me certainly did. It created conversation. And the last piece I want to say about it is just that I think the one thing that's still going to get the audience to come see a movie is a great idea, a very sort of generative idea that, you know, I heard it defined in a perfect way, which is, you need to leave the movie theater going, what would happen if that happened to me? If you have a movie that makes you feel that, original or not, I think that's still the ultimate currency for horror films.
Yeah, hey, look, I think you have to look at the difference between box office success and success in a movie, right? Because certain movies will lend themselves to giant box office success. The one great thing about horror, especially in the independent world, is you can be super successful both from an audience standpoint but also financially, even if it's not the biggest box office movie out there. So I think part of it is defining what you're looking at as for success. I mean, something like Scream, obviously being a franchise that's been so loved for so long and having such a, you know, sort of rabid and great fan base, but also trying to be able to turn that into, you know, something new for new people. That for us, success was going to be box office success. I mean, the budgets are a little higher than some of the more indie stuff. But I've been involved in a number of horror franchises where they didn't need to have that kind of box office recognition to be massively successful. And that's one of the places that I think, unlike other areas in our business, horror does very well in the indie space. Yeah. And I think that gives a great outlet for a lot of filmmakers that may not get the opportunity to have huge box office success, but that doesn't mean it wasn't successful. So I just think it's, well, I love it, and I'll take the accolade of having a movie that's, you know, the #1 horror movie. We'll take that any day of the week. We don't always drive for that, depending on what we're bringing out. And I think that's where a lot of original IP can really break through.
No, I agree. Theatrical is not your only form of success, and I can't stress that enough. I mean, there's so many other options. I mean, from the indie perspective, I'm looking at further beyond theatrical, what you're bringing in on that. I'm looking at, you know, everything internationally. I'm looking at what potential, you know, options and offers and where that leads you as a producer. You know, it's all about positioning yourself and making sure that we are creating good deals for you so that way you can go on and make another one, right? And then to touch on, you know, these sequels and things, I love them, and I love that they're showing up in, you know, the top 20, top 10, because they're inspiring people. You know, how many times do I get a movie and it's like, oh my gosh, I watched, you know, Scream, and now I'm like, oh my gosh, what would I do if that was me? And how would I make that? And how do I share my story and my experience of something, well, hopefully not similar, but do you know what I mean? Like yeah. Not kidding.
We might have an issue with that.
Whoa. No, but do you know what I mean, where I'm going with that? Like, it just, like, I think it's so cool that can inspire you and move you forward. So that's, yeah, kind of my take on the two things there.
I mean, I think coming at it from like an indie perspective of like what's successful and box office, I think everyone's right. Like, doesn't necessarily make it successful. I think from my perspective, like I've dealt with my movies going to theaters or not a lot of theaters or not at theaters at all and done streaming directly. So I guess I sort of calibrate what success is for me differently than what box office is, of course. So as a filmmaker, I come into it thinking about, did I get across what I wanted to get across as my vision out there, how I wanted it to be perceived? Did I have a good time with the producers? Did the studio enjoy working with me? That to me feels like part of like what I consider success from where I come from in the indie space, and that's just because I keep getting jobs, right? So that means I feel like I'm being successful if the same producers and studios keep coming back to me saying, hey, we want to work with you. But I definitely think IP and sequels aren't going anywhere. That's going to be the thing. But I agree that there's some really talented indie films out there that are really sparking and really hitting. And I think the audience is kind of itching for that. I think they're excited to see new things, and getting younger people into the theater is super crucial. And I'm sure there's a lot of studies on how to do that. To me, it's just good ideas. And so good ideas, we'll figure it out.
I wanted to say one thing. It feels like everybody here has in common, which is also this thing of, I think horror is the most kind of responsible genre in terms of spending, right? I think the way that we, the way that we make these things, you don't need to, like, when you make $100 million movie, everybody at your test screening, every single demographic has to love that movie or you're in trouble. But I think when you make a film responsibly, there's this feeling of, well, we can make it for this audience. And I think that's what everybody is saying here, that it doesn't need to be, the four quadrant, everybody's got to love this movie. You can, within this genre, you can make very specific things. You can make things with the purpose, going to a specific audience, and still, maintain a certain amount of success, get your money back, and have people excited about whatever you're doing next.
Very cool. So let's get a little bit more into the specifics of what we're talking about, dive a little bit deeper. So in the ever-changing kind of and fickle world of horror, how well are you able to predict the success of your films before they're made? And there's another part to this. And then also, what I probably, and I don't know if we touched upon this, but I think what's really cool about this panel is we have filmmakers, writer-directors, directors, we have international sales, we have finance and production. So literally, if we have time, we're going to try to figure out how to make a movie together as a group of producers in this room. But just speaking from your own specific experiences, whether it's from production or whether it's from development financing or writing, what are some good tools for determining how well a film can do? And can you give a personal example of a film you thought would be successful and wasn't, or vice versa? And for Bishal and Steven, this might not be as relevant, but can you kind of talk about maybe a personal experience from production where you adjusted to kind of make something more successful while you were shooting it?
Yeah.
So I know it's kind of a long-winded question, but we're going to start with Cecilia.
You asked me this question probably a couple days ago, and I still, it happens all the time. It's really hard to tell you a specific film. There was a time where, there's been films where we picked up where it was female-led, and it's a teenager. It's like, well, how the heck, who's going to watch that? And it turned out to really be amazing. When there was a time where horror films were just adults, and now it's, you've got the youth coming in, which plays into bringing the youth into the theaters, and then, inspiring thoughts on that. So that's, one thing that we didn't see happening. Currently, there's another film that, comedy horror. Man, when they presented me comedy horror, I was like, what? I was like, yeah, sure, like it's been done, but I don't see anything, crazy successful with that. But you'd be amazed to see, and that's something I've noticed in this market, is that comedy horror has really grown internationally and is expanding. And when I'm pitching these meetings that I'm having, I'm noticing that it's like, oh wow, like you're really interested in that, or the creative horror film where it's not as scary, it's not all about the jump scares, it's about using the tools that you have to share the story in a way that everyone can understand it. That has been huge. So I know you wanted a specific answer to that, but I really can't, because again, it's something that, what's beautiful about what we do is it's very creative. There's not a particular way to do it. It's always different. We are creative with the budgets that we have, and you never know. So yeah, just making good quality content to share and be able to share that amongst audiences worldwide. I think that's kind of where I sit with that.
Yeah, I'll give you like my most recent production experience where I felt like it was a disaster. When you're working with practical werewolves and you have like 5 or 6 guys in suits and they all show up on set and it looks atrocious. And you sort of start to sink in your seat and start to feel like, what am I making right now? I think it's one of those things where you have to start trusting the process and trusting the guys that do their job really well, which was the effects guys and how they brought the creatures to life and the puppeteering guys. But I mean, that, for instance, for me was a moment where I felt like I didn't know if we were going to get past that. Will the movie get past that situation? And then to see it test screen and to see an audience go bananas for it was really cool. So I think that happens all the time in production, where at some point you're feeling like this is the worst thing I've ever made, and sometimes it is. I made Escape Plan, and so me and Sly got along, and then me and Sly didn't, and then we did, and then you know what I mean. So like we had a fun time, and then the movie turned out kind of crazy, and then we ended up trying to do it again. So, but yeah. So I mean. I think as a filmmaker, you're constantly in flux with your own work anyway, creatively. So yeah, I think that's just where I'm at.
Also, to touch on that, because you just made a point, and I want to share that, is that practical effects are coming back. In a world that we're so I know.
Well, hold on. That's a question.
Oh,
for
just
later.
kidding. Just kidding. But I'm excited
Get
about
into
it.
effects.
Stealing
We're gonna get
Patrick,
it
you're stealing Patrick's job.
Sorry.
I'm running out of questions.
Okay.
Yeah, look, nobody starts out to make a bad movie, ever, right? That's just not something anybody goes in, hey, I'm going to make a bad movie. And it's fun to watch the evolution of an idea when people start to buy off on it. And the way that we always look at it is the more sort of, and I hate using the word stakeholders, but stakeholders in our business of, whether it's marketing people or distribution people or production guys that start to buy off on what you're trying to do and get excited about it, that's when we first feel like, oh, wait, we might have something. Which is hard to do, early on with a kernel of an idea. I mean, look, I was talking about it with Patrick at the beginning. I was running business affairs at Paramount Pictures when we picked up the Paranormal Activity franchise. That original movie from Oren Peli, he made as a director's reel. It was never supposed to be released. It literally, in his house over 3 days, spent, I think, $15,000 maxing out his credit card to make something to show he could direct. And at the studio, we bought it as to remake it. That was the original idea of it. And then as more people started watching this DVD, they're like, well, this is like really scary, really authentic, sort of original, but trying to get everybody at the studio bought off on the idea that we're going to take this tiny little movie and release it like a big studio movie took a lot of work from a lot of people. And once you get that, all these different groups sort of invested in the idea of it is when you see these things start to be like, wait, this could have a life way beyond anything we ever thought. And I know we'll talk about the practical effects, though, but one of the things of these budgets you find with filmmakers, and what we find a lot with the directors that we work with, they're tasked with being so creative with how they do things because they don't have the money to do it otherwise. So we'll work with first-time directors, usually second-time directors. They had maybe, a movie they did in the, sort of $250 to $750 range. And we're like, oh, we're going to go make a movie for like $5-6 million. They look at you like you're giving them $100 million. It's unbelievable. And it really is exciting to watch filmmakers. And I don't think it happens in a lot of genres of movies where you have to be so creative in how you do things just because of the constraints of a lot of what these budgets are.
I don't have anything as cool as that. The Paranormal Activity thing is great. But Patrick, you were talking about how do you know if a movie's going to be a hit or not? I think there's such a challenge. It's something I certainly didn't realize is, you start the movie and you're like, people will like this if I release it tomorrow, but nobody's going to see it for like 2-3 years, right? And when you start the film. And so there's definitely a sort of tracking of future trends of like, where are we going to be in a couple of years when this thing finally comes out, which is very difficult and it's hard to, and nobody can say for sure, but horror as a genre, I think very much ebbs and flows. Somebody asked me recently, like, do you think horror is in a good place right now? And I don't think that's the right question. I think the question is, where is horror right now in the sort of spectrum of very violent to very, not violent, whatever. Like there's so many spectrums and it's just going back and forth. So I think for me, that's the biggest thing. Our movie, one of the pieces of feedback we got when we started showing it was we want some more brutality to it, so we got to go shoot some more brutal stuff, which was great. But all that is to say, like, I think that was the big challenge, the big realization for me is you have to be thinking about where is the world going to be, where's the audience going to be when we finally get this thing in front of their eyes in a couple of years.
Let's continue with that thought, which is, I mean, just briefly, when you do have a story that's centered around something regarding a current event or where you think something's going to be in 6 months, and the process can be a year and a half, 2 years. I mean, how do you tailor a story so that you feel comfortable that it'll fit the world in a year and a half from now? You know,
I mean, for me, it's the if it's couched in something real. My movie, I think, very much was about sort of cultural assimilation. My thought was always, well, I can't make it so that only people from my background are going to get it, right? Like, I think these elements that make the movies feel fresh and make them feel current are gateways into telling very universal stories. I think that the match of those two things is where horror really thrives. It's like my movie is really about being an outsider. Everybody's felt like an outsider, right? So I think when you're making something that could feel dated before it even comes out, I think you get rid of a lot of that fear by making a movie that you feel like everyone's going to be able to connect to one way or another at any time and in any place, right?
Has not to put you on the spot, has everybody or have some of you guys seen It Lives Inside, Bishal's movie?
Let me see.
Yeah, really great.
Thank you,
It's
guys.
Really, if you guys are into horror, you highly recommend it. It's great. It's a
Thank you,
great
guys.
movie.
I really appreciate that.
So, do you want to tell them where they can? No, I'm just kidding. So, okay, we're going to get into the demo a little bit about the demographic of the horror audience today, because I think it was talked about a lot with Five Nights at Freddy's, where this demo is skewing a little bit younger. This concept of gateway horror. We're not going to really get into that much, but who do you think the modern horror audience is today? Their age, background, interests, and what does that mean to the kind of stories that we're telling today and a year from now? And sorry, these are kind of long-winded questions. And has the audience changed much over the past decade, at least from your perspective? And are we reaching them a different way today than we were even a few years ago? And I'm thinking specifically about things like social media, making the world it's a big place, but a phone that contains everything right in front of you. So, Paul.
That's a lot of questions.
Yeah, you can take any one of them.
No, look, I truly believe the horror audience at its core is always somewhere between 12 and 35, right? Other than, that's where I think the IP question comes back in, because I think you can expand on that audience if you're really talking about iconic IP. I mean, Scream in particular, we had a whole brand new generation of people that had never seen the first four. So we had to figure out a way to attend to them without giving away, all the things that your true fans want. But that also extended sort of the demographic of the movie, right? Because, look, I'll date myself. I mean, I'm going to be 55, and I remember the first Scream, right? But trying to convince my then 13-year-old twins that they should be really into this movie, they were like, you're crazy. But then when they realized some of the casting and some of the things that we did to make it more relevant. So I think that general audience is always around the same, but where you can really extend it, and I think that's where some of this iconic IP, because you have memories of those kinds of things. And I don't think that'll ever change. I think, it's interesting when you think about what's working right now. And look, the good news about the box office coming back, and you saw it, with, Five Nights at Freddy last week. I mean, that blew away, I think, everybody's expectation of what it was going to do, which is a great thing for the business and is a great thing for horror. You can't expect that on everything, but I think some of these probably less, I don't want to say less violent because that's the wrong way to look at it, but not as graphically violent horror genre type movies, and things that are tonally a little bit more fun tend to be what we see working massively right now on the bigger scale. That's sort of where we look at it.
Steve?
Yeah, I think that probably feeds into how the marketing is working right now with a younger generation getting fed it so early and so instantly. So they're actually seeing. I remember. I mean, I was born in the 80s, so how I got my information was always through Fangoria or various magazines that I would have to find. Now my daughter, who's 13, is picking it up instantaneously and able to see, hey, her favorite video game is now a movie, she can go see it. So I think that's what's really cool about horror, is that it sort of transcends each generation. It keeps going. It feels like it's constant. It's constantly in the mindset. I mean, it's always back in box office. It's always helping the box office. So for me, I feel like marketing now is so much stronger. I mean, it's so much more instant that you're able to reach such a wider audience. I guess it's like a double-edged sword of like, does it become too saturated? But it feels to me like having a daughter who's 13, that she's able to get things so much quicker and able to call her friends and be like, hey, we should go see this. And everything is so much more instantaneous.
Cecilia?
Can I talk about practical effects now?
Hold.
I mean, honestly, these guys pretty much covered it. I mean, it's the marketing, it's the... I'm sorry, that was a lot of questions that you asked.
Just the horror demo. Who do you?
I'll add one thing on the marketing, which is watching a studio, and I'm sure you're experiencing it now with Universal, if that's where you're going, which is a great marketing team. Watching a studio marketing team deploy on a horror movie like they deploy on some of their giant tentpoles is one of the most fun experiences you'll ever have.
It's awesome.
So when I was at Paramount, I sat on the Greenlight Committee, and one of the things that we would do is go to these marketing meetings for the big tentpole movies, the $150, $200 million movies. And when each one of those groups in all their territories are working because they're engaged and they think they can do innovative things, super cool. That wasn't always the case in horror. When we brought Scream 6, and it was even more so than 5, and I think partly because of COVID and people coming back to the theater, we had a marketing meeting that I'd not been in 15, 20 years, where you had territories from around the world who got what the movie was, got what we wanted to do, understood it, knew how to get their reach to their groups, a lot of by digital, which is, we can talk financially how helpful that is in a different way, because you can spend a lot less to get to a much bigger audience now that social media and digital is in a different way. But watching that marketing group like work is, and I know that's contrary to what I was saying about success and things being theatrical or not theatrical, different type of success. It's one of the coolest things. So I hope you're embarking on the entire marketing team worldwide.
I was just going to say, it really is fun to hear them shout out a lot of really crazy ideas that you're like, no, it's just a werewolf movie. But the idea that they go deeper than that and find things that are even more at its core that they can sell is pretty phenomenal. I mean, the stuff they were coming up with, even just poster-wise, now feels so different on a level that I just wasn't even aware that they got that deep on. So
we literally on the last Scream had somebody throw out in a meeting, hey, how cool would it be to have Ghostface just be where there's webcams around the world? So when people go on a webcam, they're like, holy shit, Ghostface is on the Eiffel Tower. And we did it in like 20 territories. 5 of them got arrested, which was kind of a bummer. But it was good for marketing. Yeah. But like, that kind of innovative thinking doesn't happen in a lot of genres of movies, but you can play with these things in horror in a way that you can't do in other things.
100%.
Do you want to speak to anything regarding the horror demo or marketing on your film?
It was amazing watching a distributor like Neon put together the marketing campaign for that movie. They were very gracious about keeping us involved and showing us all these materials and their ideas, to your point. Amazing distributor. I wanted to say on the demographic front, I find it really hard to actually, when I'm starting a project, when I'm writing, I find it really hard to be like, what does the 35-year-old man think of this movie, or the 14-year-old person? I find that really tough for me at that stage. It's much easier to do once you're deeper into the film. I think when I'm writing or conceptualizing, I'm really just thinking like, when did I fall in love with horror movies, and like what movie would that person have liked? So I think like I just think about, would, I guess, 13, 14, 15-year-old me have really loved this movie? And that becomes a bit of a North Star in the writing process. But of course, these are the experts on when we get to actually share the film, it's a whole different conversation.
Well, again, it's keeping in mind, don't, at least for what I've experienced in horror, is that you need to think bigger than, again, the 35-year-old male or the 13-year-old. You got to think about what can we all relate to. And I think, again, with horror, it's so great because, again, you can share horror with everyone internationally, like I've said before. So just keeping in mind like the bigger picture and not just gearing it towards a specific person, if that makes sense.
Is it enough to just make a movie today, or do you have to have a plan for ancillary sequels, creating an entire horror ecosystem? And are you getting this kind of pushback from any of your studio partners, independent partners, or is it just, are we just still making movies? Paul?
Look, the filmmakers in the room are not going to like my answer, which is you should always be thinking of these in franchise terms, in my mind, right? And I don't mean that. And again, I come at it from, I am the most non-creative of the group that I work with because I came from the business and finance side. I tend to know what will work when I read it. I can't create it. But so it's easy for me to say that answer, but it's a very truthful thing. And part of that will be allowing you to work with bigger budgets and work with bigger distributors and building a fan base that will live with you for a very long time. And I don't mean it just from the monetary standpoint, but I mean it from a true fan base. I mean, it was 10 years between Scream 4 and 5, it may have been longer actually. And because it was an iconic piece of IP, we had a built-in audience. Now, that comes with a lot of things that are scary of like, okay, and they're crazy fans in the Scream world, as are in other horrors. And if you allow yourself to go down the deep dive, our directors, the guys that make up Radio Silence, who are amazing directors, and we love them and do so much with them, they would spend hours on Reddit at night doing deep dives into like these threads of, are they doing it right? Are they doing it wrong? Like, no one's seen the script yet. Like, nobody should have an opinion on what you're doing yet. And it's good and bad, but it leads into, you know, the franchise nature of some of these things. And it will allow you the opportunity to do things that you can't do just in a one-off. Now, not every piece of material needs to be that, right? There is a place for original stories that only live within themselves. But as you're, you know, thinking about these things, if you can think of them in a little bigger standpoint, it will open up a lot of doors down the road.
Yeah, it's always, for me as a filmmaker too, when I'm thinking about that, especially recently, it's with werewolves and stuff like that, it was like, can we tell the whole world story we need to tell in just one movie? And the answer was always no. So we were always talking from the very beginning that we had a world that we wanted to create, and we know there's a much bigger world because it's almost like a werewolf pandemic happening. And so what we could accomplish with multiple movies, that's actually where we started when we were coming up with the concept, when we were finishing the script, was we had 3 done at once because there was just too much to tell in one story. So we were already thinking franchise from the very beginning. And I think that's just sort of even coming from, I started out in horror, and then I moved into action, and in the action world, it feels like franchise is like, that's where it's at. So doing that in the action world, it sort of tuned me to sort of think franchise as soon as I get into a project, and can we make this into something more? And just from a filmmaking standpoint, I like to spend as much time in those worlds as possible, and especially in the horror space, when you can tell more of that story is even more important in bringing in new characters and experiencing it that way. I feel like franchises allow you to do that. And I mean, the Scream franchise is just a great example of bringing characters in and out, again, with legacy characters and what they did with that. And I don't even want to get into the Reddit conversation of what I go down on the loopholes with, of werewolves and what werewolves do and don't do. Oh my God. So like, I'm there for like days, it feels like, looking at that. So, but anyway, yeah, that's it.
Yes and no. Yes, I think you should always be thinking further than where you're standing. I think you should be thinking steps ahead. That's just from a sales perspective. However, at the same time, there's still nothing wrong with making a one and done. That's fine too. Don't feel like you have to, put yourself in a situation where you're panicking because you're like, I don't know what else to talk about regarding spiders. Again, it goes, what? You don't like spiders? Oh, okay. So the next one's going to be a spider movie, guys. No, but do you know what I'm saying is that, yes, always continue to look forward in the future. And of course, as someone who works in sales, I'm always looking to work with the same producers, especially if you create quality. It's a beautiful oiled machine if we can continue to keep it running. But again, if it's a one and done and you want to move on to something else, I want you to stay creative. I want you to stay happy. I want you to be excited about it. If you're no longer creative about it and you're like, oh, dang, now I'm stuck with, having to make 3 more of this movie, it's not going to do well, right? So that's my take on it.
I think creatively it's a great exercise too, because let's say you don't end up making the sequel, and that's fine. But I think in the horror world, because a lot of the time we're making smaller movies, imbuing the story with scope is something that is only going to help the movie. And even if you don't end up making part 2, 3, 4, 5, that you're creating a story that's going to live on in the audience's mind, and it's making them wonder what's going to happen next. What are these implications? I think making a movie that's a keyhole into a much larger world, whether it results in a franchise or not, is just more generative for the audience. It's just going to keep them engaged longer. So I think. And I do think that if you're cheap with it, the audience can always tell, they can feel insincerity. So it's never about doing that, like, here's our little sequel hook. But I think a good story that feels like it has characters that are going to go on after the fade to black at the end. It has, a world that's bigger than the scope of just this movie. I think all of that, whether it leads to a franchise or not, is just better for the storytelling.
I love all these answers. Thank you. So I want to talk a little bit about, because I'm assuming that a lot of people in this audience are independent filmmakers and more leaning into that world. So it's kind of difficult to be talking about studio stuff because you're like, well, how do I get into that business? So I wanted to talk a little bit about the independent filmmaking experience, particularly with our filmmakers here. And could you maybe speak to your specific experiences? You can talk about year 2 and It Lives Inside, but about the process of getting your indie films made, sort of like the trajectory, who came, who supported you, the dark moments, the bright moments, and then ultimately how it all worked, getting it made from beginning to end, but in a condensed fashion.
Well, I was just incredibly lucky with the partners that I had, and I think that's the biggest part of this. I had QC Entertainment they'd done Get Out, The Black Klansman. Sean did Donnie Darko back in the day. So I was with people that were making the movies that really inspired me with this one. And then Neon came on board. And so they were just amazing partners. And I felt like I had all the support. I never felt like what you were saying earlier about, you give these younger filmmakers $5-6 million and they're freaking out. I was like losing my mind. I was coming from, shorts that we did for like $8,000, right? And my dream when I made a short film called Inferno, my dream was that I'm gonna make this short film with my own money and somebody's gonna maybe give me like 50 grand to go make something. And that snowballed into this opportunity. So it was really incredible. And I felt like I had so many resources and yeah, I felt like it went tremendously well, and I'm just so glad it happened that way for me.
How long was in terms of time, how long was the process for you?
So I started writing this, I started writing It Lives Inside at the beginning of 2020, Wild Time, and basically QC came on very early into the process and we developed it together, and that was one of those things. I think the right producers are so important because they had helped with a movie like Get Out. They had helped kind of really set the tone for what this sort of cultural horror subgenre could be. And so in a way I could ask them for guidance on how to shape it, and then also in a way I had their support to do something different because they'd already done that, right? So having producers who know how to deal with the specific subgenre you're working with, that helped me really navigate all that. And then we shot the film in 21. Actually, with very similar crews. Stephen and I worked. Yeah, we worked in Vancouver. Lovely place to go shoot a movie, and and then we premiered at South by this year. So it's been a weird kind of journey with all that.
I think I'll talk about my first movie instead of year 2 because year 2 is sort of like a journey to get to, and then it was like that movie dealing with producers and all that stuff is so different than first-time filmmakers starting out and trying to get their movie made. Automaton Transfusion. Yeah, so I made Automaton Transfusion in 2006 at my film school with like me and 20 other film students and had in Florida. Didn't know anybody in Los Angeles, and we did it with all based on like my credit card, and so that's how we funded the movie, was my credit card. It was originally a short, and I said screw it and made it into a feature somehow. We shot it in 9 days. It was insane, but I sort of like throw that out there because I love short films and I love watching short films. My path was and I thought about it very early on, was I cannot sell a short film. So like my thought was, if I'm going to sell something, I got to sell a feature to make this money back. And so that's how I started out thinking about it, and then figuring out the horror genre was my favorite space. It felt like the easiest space to get into. And then I was, talking about it earlier, is that like, a lot of horror was really slow burn. It's really, that's kind of the thing. Well, how do I set myself apart? Well, I'm going to try to do the most ballistic horror film, action-y horror film I can possibly think of with zombies. And so I went out and I made that, and then drove it out here to LA, and did some pretty wild things. I won't say I broke onto the Sony lot, but I broke onto the Sony lot, and had the trailer on a CD and passed it around, and ridiculously ended up in Sam Raimi's hands. And Sam was the first person to watch my movie on the big screen in 2007 at that point. And Sam was instrumental in, it was right before Ghost House was picking up things they were about to, but Sam was instrumental in getting it over to Dimension, who then put my film out for the Dimension Extreme label. It went with that label first. So, but that process was a 3-year process, from making the movie to getting out to LA and sleeping in my car for 2 years, editing the movie in my car, trying to figure out who's going to do the sound design for free or on Craigslist at that time, which is bananas, and like trying to get all of these elements together, and then trying to figure out how to get in the hands of who needed to see it was also insane. So it was a lot of that, hanging out with the local film group, which in this area, I mean, the film community is so small, and everybody sort of knows each other, and everybody really wants to help each other, which was really great. And that's what I love about the horror community. And so that's really, for me, what sort of how I got here and how I did it was just really relentless, and trying to push as hard as I could, get to know everyone I possibly could. I mean, I remember watching I remember watching Paranormal Activity on a couch with Jeff Katz and a few other guys that they were all like, what is this? And then you guys made it major magic, and you guys crushed it. So like, I mean, it's just what's so great about the horror genre and the people in it is they want to help. They want you to get the best experience. They want your movie to succeed, of course, financially, but just from a communal space, is horror is so communal. So it's like, I feel like for me, it was really important that I just sort of went for it. And I say that to any filmmakers that are coming to me and saying, how should they do it? I just say, make your movie. And that there's all different kind of ways, and obviously that can go. But ultimately, it's your journey, and you got to figure out how to do it. So that's the path I took.
So one thing before we continue, one thing I do want to say about Steven, because I was having a conversation with him the other day. And so as I mentioned, he just did this film called Year Two, and they're planning this huge marketing campaign. It's a big theatrical release in February. And so I was, in my mind, I'm like, okay, so now you're just going to be focusing on this, and, it's going to be just, but the way Steven works, and this is how he's always been as a filmmaker, is like he's, as I said, constantly in motion. So he said to me, it's like, oh, hey, this financier came to me the other day, and they want me to direct this movie. And I was like, oh, and I'm assuming it's like after Year Two. And he's like, no, they want me to shoot it. I've got, I don't know how much, like you've got 2 or 3 weeks to prep it. And I was like, and he's like, now, and he's like, I'm going to go shoot it. And it's like, he cannot not be busy. So it's like, we
really start shooting in 2 weeks.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's just kind of crazy, but I really admire that. So, is there do you guys want to add anything to the conversation? Because I got lots more stuff we can talk about.
Like, the only thing I'll add, and I think Steven's 100% right, we would all be lying to you if we said we knew what works and what doesn't work. We get partly lucky, but partly build the right things. But if you truly believe in something, no should never be a answer to you. There are always avenues to get things through. So I applaud that, he did that and brought it out and sold it in the way he did, because that's how most of these things start out.
Yeah. And I will say also my Paranormal Activity moment, I will say really, really quickly, because I saw it in Slam Dance in 2008. And I remember sitting in that theater, and it really is like once every decade experience where I was sitting there and I was watching it and I was really into it. But I in the back of my mind, I was like, it is really fucking quiet in here. And it's like normally you heard, people eating stuff or coming in and out of the theater, nothing. And I remember turning around in the theater, which was packed, just looking at people's hands on their chairs, just frozen solid. And I was like, oh shit, this is going to be huge. This is going to be huge. So it's just like, It's amazing that you were part of that. Cecilia, I'm sorry, did you want to add something? Or we have other questions too.
I think you should go make your movie, no matter what.
Okay.
That's my 2 cents. Yeah, just do it. I mean, if you have the passion for it and you want it bad, it'll work out. And I'm a strong believer that if it's really good quality and you put your heart into it, then we can make it work. We can make it sell.
So it's another two-parter. What is the biggest challenge in getting your horror film made today, at least in your opinion, or what are an obstacle? And what effect, this is kind of a separate thing, what effect has the streaming business had on the horror film business? And anybody can start, or not? And then we could talk about the shift to horror minis.
What was the first part of the question again?
What is the biggest challenge in getting horror films made today?
I mean, I think it's super challenging now because, I mean, from a filmmaker standpoint, anyone can make a movie now more accessibly. Like, I mean, I can go shoot a movie with my iPhone now. So, I mean, everyone out there can make a movie. So getting it made is a little bit more difficult because there's so much content coming in, and I think your content has to be so specific and almost exceed, your ideas have to exceed expectations to get made. I mean, of course, once you start making films and you get with the right producers and you get with the right people that have your back, it becomes a little easier because then they're sort of coming back to the well and, hey, Steven, let's make this, let's make that. But I can imagine now for indie filmmakers, it's got to be a little bit more challenging to get your stuff seen just because there's so much out there. At the same time, it's probably also easy to throw it up on your website or onto social media, which I didn't have when I came out here. So it's probably a double-edged sword, but I just feel like it's definitely difficult.
Yeah, I mean, look, we could do a whole separate panel on the benefits and the non-benefits of streaming. But I do think there are many more outlets to sell to now than there have ever been. Now, that's not always a good thing because there's a lot of content out there, not just in the horror space, that's just not good because there's outlets there to, buy it. But I think it's given filmmakers an opportunity to get their stuff more widely seen than probably any time previously. I'd be interested, though, internationally, if it's still the same that way. But there's definitely more places to go see it. I think getting something released by a major studio has gotten much harder than it's ever been, and especially if it's not based on IP. You have to get a lot of people bought off in earlier on. And look, the biggest thing that you have the ability to do, if you have the ability to do it, is finance it on your own or find creative ways to finance it, because that you're taking out one step of somebody saying no to you if you can do that. It makes a big difference in the business.
I was going to say, I think the big picture conceptual challenge is if you want to bring a horror film to a wide audience, I think it's towing the line between how do you satisfy the horror audience, but then how do you bring other people into the mix too? And then it goes back to the sort of high concept thing I was talking about. I think a movie like Quiet Place brings in the horror audience, it satisfies them, but then is expanding so far beyond that. And I think it's tough to come up with a movie that is going to satisfy on that primal level that horror films need to, but then transcend it and do something else and maybe be a great character piece, maybe mix it in with some other genre elements, but not lose that DNA of horror. So I think that's a challenge in terms of figuring out what's going to resonate with the widest audience possible.
Do you want to talk a little bit about the international space in horror right now, Cecilia?
Yeah, I mean, everything that they're saying is correct. It's everything that comes through my table is, how... Yeah, I mean, honestly, you guys have pretty much hit it all. From the international space, I think there is a lot of out there where you can put your film and share it, and it's all about being strategic about how you share your film. Again, it's what I was saying, is that you want to play your film in a way that is going to reach the audiences that you're wanting. It's going to be, positioning yourself as a producer, director, in a place that that you can get the exposure that you need, so you can go back and make another one. Again, I'm all about the machine, if you haven't noticed. So yeah, I mean, it's just all about being strategic. It's about knowing what you're creating. It's being about passion. It's getting with the right team, and it does take time. And so if some inspiration. Don't lose hope. Like, you'll find the right team, and that will help support you and leverage you, and basically sum up everything that we've talked about today and get you to where you need to be.
So I have so many questions, and I have to skip ahead here because I know I wanted to kind of keep this a tight 1 hour. So I'm gonna try to jump ahead here. So let's talk a little bit about your personal experiences, people in your lives who have helped you, moments in your lives that have helped you kind of get ahead, and just speaking to the audience, because I know people are curious, I think, about your journey. So like, what or who has helped you get where you are today, and what advice would you have for other people looking to get into the field? Just, practical real world examples, hopefully.
I mean, I think make friends. A lot of the big moments that have come from me have come from friends who've believed in me for a long time. I worked with the same DP, the same composer on my feature film, and they had initially believed. I think it was like 19 when I reached out to them. I was like, "Hey, I want to make a movie," and they believed in me for a long time. They shepherded, a lot of my growth, and then I was able to help turn around and get them onto my movies. And I think that it's the long haul, and I'm sure everyone here will agree, but it's just, it really makes a difference to believe in people and have them believe in you long term. I think there's this weird misconception that it's a very transactional business, but I think the people that stick around are the people that you make the biggest leaps with, and that's certainly been my experience. Every sort of big moment that's come from me has come from someone saying, "I believed in you for a long time, and I am going to help you by believing in you one more time here." And I'd like to do the same. I think that's what keeps the world spinning in our industry.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I spoke at a film class not so long ago at SC, and one of the things I said is, like, look around this room. Like, these are the people that you're going to grow up with in the business. And these are the people that you're going to be calling on favors on to, hey, come edit my movie. Hey, can you score my movie? Hey, I need a day shoot somewhere. I know you have a crew. Can I go steal a day? In that, and it's a little different if you're not in that type of environment, but the film industry is a really collaborative business, and it always has been. And there are people that are horrible people, and just don't deal with them if you have to deal with them. But no, for the most part, it's a family business. It has always been a family business, and surrounding yourself with people that you can go to consistently with, just, hey, I have this idea, I want to bounce it off you. Can you come watch this and give me sort of your thoughts? It makes a massive difference in the business. And again, I grew up not so much on the content side, but more on the business side. But pretty much everybody that I'm close with are people that I grew up in the business side over years. Now, fortunately, a lot of them are in big jobs in studios, but I'm still in that position of, because we all grew up together in the business, we can call, and bounce ideas off, harder to get favors from studios than it used to be. But finding that group and being with them is huge. Making a movie is really hard. So if you can make it with people you like, it makes a big difference. We started Project X a little over 4 years ago, and we're on our 4th movie with the directors Radio Silence because we love them. We're collaborative with them. We have a shorthand with them, and that's fun. Like, we can disagree on huge things, and at the end of that disagreement, we're still, enjoying it. And I think finding that core group, and I think that's what you were mentioning, is really, really important. Don't be afraid of that.
Yeah, I mean, echoing that is probably one of my biggest things when I first got out here was making friends with all the assistants of everyone I met. Because
is that how you broke on the lot?
That's how I broke on. That is exactly how I did it. And to be honest, it's some of those assistants who are hiring me now as execs, who are in different fields, who are the ones going, I like Steven then, now they're, wherever they are, where they were at Fox Atomic or where they are now, it's like, now those are the people hiring me, which I think just goes to say, what they're saying is that the horror space, everyone does treat you like a family for the most part. There are the bad whatever. But, if you're really open to people and you're friendly and you show some respect for what the genre is, I think people really they enjoy that, and they keep coming back. So yeah, it really is about reaching out to people you love. I mean, I'm after Automaton Transfusion was sold, I went through a 3-year period where it felt like I was in every studio meeting, doing every studio possible thing, and then I still didn't get that big movie that I thought was going to happen, and I had to sort of like reboot myself in 2012, and that's with someone like Brad Miska from Bloody Disgusting, who came through big time for me, who was a horror guy, and he was someone that was like, hey, don't bounce, it's not over, we can figure out something, we'll find something for you, and ultimately, it did, and that was a snowball effect into what I'm doing now. But there are going to be those moments that feel like catastrophic, and to have those people around you out here that aren't family, that feel like family around you to give you that support and say, hey, you can keep going, is super crucial in this business, in my opinion.
I could literally talk about this for hours. The way I got started in the industry is I didn't even know I was going to be in sales. I didn't know what sales was. I didn't understand it, didn't even know anything about it. It's about putting yourself out there. I started off going to the Cannes Film Festival. I sold everything I owned. I went out there and I made coasters for business cards, and I put them underneath everyone's drinking can. And that's how I started the conversation, little did I know. But in your case, right now, you guys are in a room together. I mean, look at all of you. You guys all have something in common. You guys all are here for, horror films. And so if you're looking to network, I mean, you're all what a beautiful opportunity, right? Like, you're all here together. The nice thing about film is that we travel, like we're this massive traveling circus, and we're always in the same place at the same time. Like, take advantage of that. I don't know any other business truly that can do that. And again, we're all like family. I mean, we go out and there's cocktails and there's, meetings and you're constantly being creative. And I don't know, I'm very passionate about that. And I think that you should take full advantage of that. And that will ultimately lead you to where you want to be. Like, exactly, like Steven said, the assistant he was nice to then is now an executive and is hiring him. Or I used to go see Steven when he used to speak at my university. Yeah. And now here I am sitting next to him. Oh my God. But you never know in this industry, and you never know where you're going to sit and who you're sitting next to. So take advantage of that. It's honestly the best advice I can give you.
Very cool. And also, just as a side note, I think it's on YouTube, Mark Duplass did a great keynote speech. I don't know if you guys, I think it's called The Cavalry is Not Coming. Yeah. So if anybody wants to check it out, it's hilarious and really sort of inspirational, and it's basically about surround yourself with a bunch of people who are like-minded, who want to make movies with you, and don't wait for the cavalry to come. It's a really great speech. All right, Cecilia, you're up. We're going to do practical effects versus CGI. All right, are you ready?
Oh no.
No, it's not complicated. It's not complicated. But do you have a preference for either? And do modern audiences still want old school practical effects?
Hell yeah, they do. Hell yeah, they do. Yeah, I mean, we're in a time where I think VFX and these massive, big budget, big companies were coming in, and they were making this amazing stuff, and that's so great, and I still love it. Like, I love the Marvels. I love anything, massive. However, realistically speaking, we miss that practical effects. I mean, look at Terrifier. Like, wow, that was cool. At least in my opinion, and it's doable, and it's fun, and it's creative, and you get excited, and kind of like what you're talking about when you were having the practicals in your film, and you're making it, and you're like, oh, I don't know about all this. I've definitely been on sets where I'm like, oh, I don't know, man, but it comes together, and it's so cool from a audience perspective, and then from a filmmaker perspective, and then again to see it from a sales perspective, and then you get excited. And at the end of the day, I know that I work in sales and I work with the buyers and sellers, but we're still filmmakers too, right? So yes, I definitely believe that practical effects are still up and coming. I think that that's what audiences want to see more now than ever, to be honest.
Anybody want to speak to that on?
I had a practical monster in my movie, and I loved it, and it was a very specific choice. I think it comes back to CGI is a great tool, visual effects are a great tool. I think that's how you have to utilize them. We also have over 100 years of cinema and cinematic techniques. I mean, you watch Ruben Mamoulian's Jekyll and Hyde from the 1930s. They're doing this stuff where they're taking the red plate out, and all of a sudden, stuff is, we have so much that we can do photographically, and I do think it makes a difference for the audience. I do think that there is a tangibility to practical effects, and that's not to say that you're limited. Then we had a person in a suit, but then I would shoot them either at 18 frames a second or 36 when it was a single on the monster, and so you always have something weird. There's just so much that we can do, and I think the last thing I want to say is on visual effects. I think also it's an economic thing. I think overloading the visual effects vendors is leading to the shots being worse and their working conditions being untenable. I think looking at with your VFX team, special effects team, going, what is the right way to do this, as opposed to let's give them 2,000 VFX shots and hope that every single one is A tier. I just don't think that's doable.
And to add to that, it's blending them, right? So yes, we have these really cool tools now. And then again, looking at it from a financial perspective, it's can we seamlessly modify it and make it where you've got the CGI and the VFX tools and all that cool stuff, and then the practicals, and can you merge them together? I think that's the sweet spot that you're looking for. If you can make them seamlessly put together and package that's where you want to be.
Well, that's a great point, because it's also like when visual effects are augmenting something that's been photographed, I think it's so much better, because there's things that you wouldn't think of. I mean, let's think about your specific set of lenses that you use. What is the exact sort of level of chromatic aberration that you're going to feel right at the edge of whatever harsh light source there is? That's something that you would have to figure out in the CG shot. Whereas if you shoot something and build on it, it's being photographed by the lenses, by the camera, within your light source. I mean, all that, I think, that's what I'm saying. It makes it feel more tangible to the audience if you're building from something that was photographed, I think.
Yeah, I love practical effects. I mean, that's just like, I'm an 80s kid. I grew up on it. Anything I can feel, touch in front of the camera is where I start, always, and what I want to happen. Does that always work? No. And do we know it's going to have to go on to do some kind of visual effect? Sure. But I think they're exactly right. I mean, being able to augment is very different than creating from scratch in the visual effects world. And so especially with the werewolf film, like, we went into it 100% practical. And then when we realized the werewolves couldn't do some of the things that we needed them to do, we still shot them doing it, knowing that VFX would augment that and really take it to the next level. But for the most part, when you're working with guys like, we had Alec Gillis on the movie, who did Predator and Prey and Alien and built these things, and you have the guys in the suits and Dan, and who was the Predator in Prey, and he's in the suits, and you have 5 other guys like him that are 7 foot tall in these things. Like, there's something magical about that when you're out on set and you're seeing these guys do these things that should not be able to be done in these suits, and they pull off some of the most awesome stunts and some of the most crazy circumstances. There's just something about practical effects that is just amazing. I love it. I feel like horror films are also sort of given a pass to practical effects. Whether or not they look perfect is not really the audience. They don't care. The audience just wants to see it. And so that's what I love about horror films, is the audience is very forgiving, but they can also be a bitch, right? So they can hate certain things, and that's just the way it is. But I think when it comes to practical versus visual effects, I think the natural horror community is always going to say they prefer the practical. And I think even my kids now, having dealt with so much CG stuff, I know when my daughter came to set and saw a practical werewolf, she was actually a little bit more scared because it felt even more real. I don't know if that's a good way to explain it for her, but she was just blown away by how intrusive it was. And so I think practical effects are definitely something that's going to stick around. I think visual effects are fantastic. I think they're a wonderful tool. And I think as much as I could use them to enhance the picture, I do. But for the most part, we tried to stick very, very practical.
Yeah, no, I don't have much to add to that, other than I agree with everything you're saying. I mean, some of the horror films are made for less than the catering budgets of big films. So you get to the place of, just from a standpoint of practicality, you have to go down that road. And I will tell you, and I said it a little bit earlier, watching filmmakers come up with creative ways to do things out of necessity, rather than because they don't have the access to 2,000 visual effects shots, is some of the greatest creative moments you have in a movie. And some of the craziest stuff that when they have a wish list of things they need to go get to make that work is super fun. So we, anytime we can, look, you're never going to get, I won't say never, but it's rare that you're ever going to not be able to use visual effects to enhance what you're doing, but use it for what it's intended for, unless the movie lends itself. You want to be authentic to what you're doing to the extent you can be.
Very cool. And so many questions, and I'm running out of time, and I see all these questions coming in. So we're going to start to wrap this up with one sort of like one concluding question, and then we're going to do a speed round with 3 questions. What interesting ideas would you like to see explored in horror, and what do you see as the most interesting trend for 2024 and beyond, or
I don't know. I'd like to see more invasion films. As far as like some, not invasion, but I really liked the movie on Hulu, No One Will Save You. And I thought that movie was fantastic. And I really love alien films, sci-fi films. I'd really like to see more. I should say abduction movies. I really want to see abduction stuff happening on the ship. I want to see somebody getting messed with on the ship. So I feel like like I love Nope. The greatest piece of Nope that scared me the worst is when they were sucked into that bubble and they're all stuck in there. Like, what's that movie? You know what I mean? Like that's sort of the stuff that I would love to see more of. I'm cool with Earth stuff. I'm just over it. So like, get me on to some Event Horizon stuff where it gets kind of nuts. But yeah, I really feel like that's sort of like what I would love to see.
I can tell you what I want to see, and then I can tell you from a sales perspective. I mean, honestly, I really, in horror, I think things that we can relate to a certain extent, like nothing crazy. Don't go doing stuff, but I think it's something that's relatable. I want to see a character who could be me. Like, what if it was me in that situation and I was stuck in that spaceship? How would I handle that situation? What would that look like? I want to see people who, I don't want it to be this unrelatable character, essentially is what I'm trying to get to. I love female leads. I think that's super great. I love to see people from different cultures. I don't know, I just want to see something a little bit different. But I also want it to be practical. Like I said, I love practical effects if you haven't put that together already. But I want to see the indie filmmaker make something really incredible. I love watching something start from so small, from an idea to blowing up into this massive thing for little to no budget, right? So that's kind of what I'm interested in.
I want to see, in the horror space, I want to see more eco-horror. I think it's not done enough, and I think there's a way to reflect a lot of our real-world anxieties and fears without ever being preachy. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Junji Ito's artwork. He's a Japanese artist, and I think Netflix did an animated series illustrating some of his short stories, and there's an absurd horror to them. I think you should check them out. I think they're really scary and high concept, and I want to see more of that translated for American audiences.
I think it's probably impossible to do now, but I want to be surprised when I see something for the first time in a way that nobody else is blowing it for us out, either on the internet or in marketing. I don't think you can actually get away with it anymore. But that to me would be, if somebody could pull that off. And it wasn't a horror movie, but I think back to The Sixth Sense, right, which was an ending that everybody was shocked by at the time, and there wasn't really the internet like there is now, where you went in and you didn't know how it was going to end. And I just think that's going to be almost impossible to pull off. But if somebody could figure that out, it would be huge.
So we literally are we're coming down here. There's a giant clock here in the front, so it's really like I'm keeping track of how much time we have. So I was going to do a whole speed round. I'm going to ask you just one question. What is your go-to horror film?
Evil Dead 2.
Are we just going? Yeah.
That's it.
Hush.
Nightmare on Elm Street.
Oh, that's insane.
I'll go with Poltergeist.
Yeah.
All excellent choices. So I want to get to some questions because I see them populating the iPad here. So, well, first of all, I just want to say before we all break up here, I just want to say thank you, everybody, to our panel here. They've been amazing. Okay, so first question is, what are your thoughts on adding comedy to horror slash slasher films?
I mean, I feel like that's almost imperative in slasher films, is that there's some kind of humor. I mean, the Scream movies do it the best. There's always something that it sort of feels like you shouldn't be laughing at, but you're laughing at anyway. And I think that's what's great about horror movies, and that's what I was saying earlier about the wave of emotions that horror can take you through, is you can be absolutely terrified, and in that same moment find yourself giggling, and that's usually when the filmmaker has you, right? If they can get you to start smiling or laughing, then they're just going to mess you up, because after that it's going to get bad. So I think it's crucial.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I am definitely seeing that a lot in this market. I've seen it in the last year or so. There's a proper way of doing it, of course. You've got to find that sweet spot, like you had mentioned. But yeah, I think you definitely need to do it. If you're riding that roller coaster, I think that's where horror lives.
I think it's a crucial part of disarming an audience before you scare the hell out of them. I think if you don't utilize it, and I don't know that I knew how important humor was in a horror film before I made this movie, but I think now I'm very strategic about, like, when do I want them to feel safest, and they're going to feel the safest when they're laughing, and that's the moment you hit them, you know.
Yeah, and look, it gives people a sense of relief for a brief moment, right? Like, these movies it's exhausting to sit through a great horror movie. But if there's a point where you're like, oh, I can take a break for a second, and it's funny, and then something happens, it's just a great way to tonally move through things.
Do you think pop culture plays a big part in making an iconic movie?
If used correctly, right? So I think it has to be authentic to your storyline. I don't think you can infuse things just to infuse them. But if you can find a way to make it part of your story. I mean, look, great horror movies work a lot of the times because it's relevant to what's happening right now, which goes back to the question earlier of, like, okay, but 18 months from now is when my release date is. Am I going to still be relevant? But if you can infuse stuff in the right way, I think it enhances it in a massive way.
Agreed.
I don't have anything to add to that.
You did it. Yeah.
All right. Do you think any niche within horror is more or less dead in the current marketplace?
No, I don't think it's dead. I think that there's a way to do things if you're doing it differently. Obviously, if you make the same vampire movie, you're going to kill it in a bad way. But if you make it in a different way, in a creative way, in a you way, and you share that, I think it makes it different. It gives it an edge, and therefore it's not dead. Yeah.
I think, again, that's why horror rules. Because every time someone says that niche market is dead, someone comes along and makes something pretty awesome with it. So that's why I love the horror community, because it's constantly reinventing itself. It's constantly pushing boundaries. It's constantly giving us new filmmakers with really cool new perspectives. And it's all basically the same stuff we've already seen. They're just doing it even differently or better or cooler. So I really think that's what's great about the horror space.
Yeah.
Very cool.
I agree. I mean, it is one of the benefits of having so many outlets that if something might not right now theatrically be the way to go, there's 15 other places you can go put it.
Okay, just a couple more questions here. If you have an independent horror film that is clearly good, like Paranormal Activity, I'm going to paraphrase this a little bit. How hard would it be to sell in today's market? Or has it changed today?
If it's clearly good.
If it's clearly good.
Is that by, like, your mom or, like...
kind of a trick
Like,
question.
did your mom say it was good? Is it like, is your best friend be like, oh, but my best friend's in it, so it's obviously good. I mean, it just depends on how you, if the quality is there, it depends on how you position it. It depends on, again, marketing. It depends on how, are you going to festivals? Who are you talking to? Who's representing your film? I mean, there's a lot of different pieces that play into the ultimate goal of getting it out there, is going to be my best answer. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, okay, sure.
I approve.
I don't know. I look at you because you work in sales, and I'm like, oh, God.
It's all good.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, look, if it is clearly good, right, then there's always a market for it. I think it'll then become a question of when is it released more than anything else, and how do you bring it out to the market. But good movies are good movies, and they're going to continue to be bought. I mean, the one thing you've seen, sort of in the last year and a half is people want to go back to the theaters. They want to experience these things. And as we talked about at the beginning, horror is one of those things that draws in groups. And that's why you see usually, first weekend, numbers are so big and there's bigger drop-off because you want to do it as a community. And the good news is they tend to go back more than once, which is really great.
Okay, so I want to wrap it up now. So last question is, and no names, you don't have to bring up any names. What are some major mistakes and missteps you've seen other horror filmmakers take? You don't have to answer that.
I can answer this not with respect to filmmakers, but I can do it in the sense of the group that put films together. And I think one of the biggest mistakes made, and it goes back to the franchise question, is thinking just because you were massively successful in a movie that means you should spend way more on the next one.
That's literally what I was going to say.
A massive mistake because the economics don't make sense. You're spending money just to spend money. And part of the reason that these movies work is there is a scope to them that makes them authentic. And yes, things are going to cost a little bit more, whether it's cast or whether it's, whatever it's going to be. But there's no reason to all of a sudden balloon budgets as movies subsequently come out. That's my perspective.
No, I totally agree.
My thing would be insincerity. I think if you're going to work in horror, I think it's like we've all been saying, it's a tight-knit community. And I think if you walk in, you're like, I love horror movies, but really it's like horror is easy and horror makes a lot of money. I think people can sniff that out very quickly. I think if you're going to make horror movies, you gotta love horror movies.
Yeah, and you can tell when someone's just trying to make a quick buck. So, yeah.
I think being collaborative is a big part of what helps you. I mean, I think a lot of my favorite filmmakers know how to talk to producers and they know how to talk to the executives who are trying to give them input. And not all the time do you have to roll over or whatever, but I think being able to be collaborative and open to those discussions, I've seen a lot of filmmakers make that mistake, and especially early filmmakers that feel like it's their way or their highway, and that usually turns out into a disaster. But I think for the most part, I think if you can open yourself to hear great ideas and be able to discuss them, even if it's in fighting terms. I know I get into screaming matches all the time with some of my closest producers, but at the end of the day, it's all because we love what we're trying to put out and we're trying to get the best possible product. And so I think it's keeping my mind open is always what helps.
The last thing I wanted to say too, after Barbarian came out, every meeting I was in, they were like, we want our own Barbarian. It was like, we want our own Hereditary. And it's like, you probably passed on that, and I think, no, my point though is that the next Barbarian, the next Talk to Me, the next one of these phenomena is not going to be a repeat of that film. It's going to be something that nobody believes in because it's so different and so weird. So I think you should be making the first of your thing that people are going to be like, we want that thing, but they passed on your thing.
That is a great point to end on. And I just want to say again, thank you to this amazing panel. And thank you all for coming. And support horror.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.